Hello and welcome to CGTN. This is The World Today. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi, and these are your top stories. The death toll in the Sierra Leone tanker explosion rises to 108 as hospitals struggle to save the critically injured. Iraq's Prime Minister confirms he survived an assassination attempt after a drone attack on his residence. And pro-government protests in Addis Ababa as some Western countries ask their nationals to leave Ethiopia while they still can. In our top story, Iraq's Prime Minister has confirmed he survived an assassination attempt. Mustafa al-Kadhimi confirmed the attack in a televised address, calling it an act of treason. A small drone packed with explosives targeted his residence in Baghdad early Sunday. The Prime Minister escaped unharmed, but several of his security guards were reportedly hurt. No group has yet claimed responsibility. This comes days after protests turned violent, with demonstrators angry over last month's elections. Our correspondent Fujin Ri has more from Baghdad.
According to Iraqi media outlet, at about 3 o'clock in this morning, local time, a booby-trapped drone attacked the residence of Iraqi Prime Minister Mustafa Kadhimi in Green Zone, Baghdad. But the attempt failed, and Iraqi security forces announced that Kadhimi was in good health. And at the same time, Kadhimi published a tweet that he was fine, and Iraqi security forces will be able to protect the safety of Iraqi people. He will stand up for his rights and the law, and Kadhimi also called on everyone to keep calm and constrained. According to the information from Iraqi security forces, Baghdad has entered emergency status, and the whole green zone has been shut down with additional guarding forces present. And there is also a video clip, I think that was shot on the phone by a local resident, that showed a series of gunshots after the incident. But the green zone is quiet now without any unusual signs. And it was believed that the Iraqi security forces are carrying out investigation on whoever conducted this failed assassination attempt.
Let's go to Sierra Leone now, where hospital authorities have started posting the names of people being brought in for treatment. This after Friday's deadly tanker explosion. The number of casualties has risen to 108. Relatives have been waiting outside hospitals for updates on the victims. Officials say nearly 100 people are being treated for injuries. Most are in a critical condition. One intensive care unit says about 30 victims are not expected to survive. Many doctors and nurses were called in overnight to handle the influx of patients. The explosion took place after a fuel tanker collided with another truck as it was pulling into a gas station near the capital, Freetown.
My name is Osman Timbo. I'm 18 years old. I lost my younger brother during the fire incident at Wellington. He left home and said he was going to buy bread for us to eat. When I heard about the explosion, I went to the scene and I saw my younger brother lying down and he was burned all over. I felt so bad. I loved him so much.
And to the latest on Ethiopia now. Countries, including the United States, Denmark and Italy, have asked their personnel in Ethiopia to evacuate the country as an armed conflict and civil unrest continue. The UN has called for an end to the fighting and for talks on a lasting ceasefire. An alliance of opposition factions led by rebels in Tigray is trying to oust Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, while on the other side, thousands of Ethiopians are voluntarily joining the army to fight the rebels. Ethiopians have expressed their wish for peace and stability.
I don't think the war will spread to Addis Ababa because our government will take strong measures. I hope our country can restore the economy and stability, and life can return to normal.
After the state of emergency was announced, there hasn't been many changes to my business. I receive our customers as usual. I'm not very worried about the future, but I hope for peace in our country at an early date.
There have been some changes after we entered the state of emergency. There are some walking checks. It's a bit inconvenient, but I don't think the war will come to Addis Ababa.
Well, let's bring you more on this. CGTN's Girum Chala is live for us in Addis Ababa. Girum, pro-government protesters in the streets today. Tell us more about that. What are they calling for, essentially?
Lindy, hands of Ethiopia, Western governments respect Ethiopia's sovereignty and territorial integrity, stop meddling into our internal politics, and many others where what has been written on thousands of placards these protesters came out with. They are demanding, obviously, what they call Western interference into Ethiopia's internal affairs. On the other hand, these thousands of pro-government protesters who came out on the streets of Addis Ababa, especially on Meskel Square, the biggest square in the country, are saying that they are denouncing TPLF's advancement. They are denouncing the fact that TPLF has had its chance of leading the country. It had many things wrong, and it needs to stay away from the central government, and it needs to respect the country's constitution at the same time. So almost all the people who came out are sounding the same issues that I've been talking about. But then again, they are also saying that they will continue supporting the government no matter what until Ethiopia is safe and away from the danger that the TPLF and others are posing according to the people there.
Well, thank you so much. We will leave it there. That is Girum Chala live with us from Addis Ababa. Now, most COVID vaccine mandates in the United States include an exemption for religious reasons, but not all. Those exceptions don't exist for healthcare workers in Maine and New York who are challenging the rules. The Supreme Court has so far upheld the requirements, but that could change. Karina Huber has more.
The majority of COVID-19 vaccine mandates in the United States have withstood legal challenges. But for those without a religious exemption, it's murkier territory.
The trend there is really unmistakable. You're looking at religious freedom-based arguments. So these are really the only arguments that are seeing any sort of headway in courts right now.
Historically, the U.S. Supreme Court did not require a religious exemption from a general rule like a vaccine mandate. But over the past year, the justices have indicated they support tightening protections for religious freedom. The Supreme Court has allowed a mandate for healthcare workers in the state of Maine to stay, despite not including a religious exemption. But 3 justices dissented, indicating that mandates that don't include a religious exemption could be overturned in the future. In New York, plaintiffs are asking the Supreme Court to hear a similar case.
I think we can hope that they will, and they can, on existing precedent, decide that vaccine mandates do not require a religious exemption, but we can't be sure.
The mandate for healthcare workers in New York originally included a religious exemption, but was later removed. Legal expert Dorit Rice says she isn't surprised. In 2019, the state faced a measles outbreak centered mainly among ultra-Orthodox Jews, some of whom refused routine childhood vaccinations on religious grounds.
So New York says, we've been there before. We've seen that religious exemption leads to more outbreaks. I think that's a reasonable point of view.
Anti-vaccine groups have reportedly been providing pointers on what to say to get a religious exemption. Many are believed to be abusing the exemption to avoid getting vaccinated for other reasons. Rice believes in the debate over religious freedom during a pandemic, public health should take precedent.
The fact that you're sincere about religion doesn't make the harm suddenly disappear. And states may say, sincere or not, we have good reason not to want religious exemption because they increase COVID outbreaks which kill and harm people.
Karina Huber, CGTN.
The China International Import Expo is underway in Shanghai. CGTN's Yang Zhangxi checked out some cool surgical robots on display.
If you think the medical pavilion of the Import Expo is all about medication and clunky equipment, think again. This is a robot from Da Vinci Surgical System that allows doctors to perform precise and minimally invasive inspections. Robot-assisted surgeries have become more commonplace throughout the world, and in this medical pavilion of the CIIE, there are other big names in the market as well. Medtronic is showcasing their Maser X spinal surgery robot. They claim it can reduce bleeding by 50% during procedures compared to open surgeries. Artificial intelligence precisely guides the robot arms.
Maser X made its China debut at last year's CIIE, and thanks to the publicity, it successfully hit the market in China this August. We have 9 strategic partners coming to sign deals on this robot at this year's expo.
Across the pavilion, Siemens Healthineers is showcasing its Corindus robot, which helps doctors perform interventional surgeries.
The guide wires in the vessels can be controlled even less than 1 millimeter. This is cannot be achieved by the human hands. With the great, market impact from this showcase, we successfully have performed first case PCI in Hainan Boao on March 13th.
With these robots set to enter more hospitals in China, a new question emerges. Do they require a steep learning curve for doctors? The answers from companies vary.
That question was raised by the expert. I raised a quite interesting answer to them, because during the clinical case in Boao, our doctor only trained 2 hours.
Intuitive Surgical Fosun, the company that owns Da Vinci System, said it has launched an innovation center in Shanghai this year.
The innovation center provides a great environment for surgeons to learn, practice Da Vinci surgery technology.
Medtronic is doing something similar.
For the robots to perform as they should, we need to get doctors able to operate them well. We have announced today the launch of our training center for doctors to train their skills.
These companies are confident that their robots offer huge advantages that can improve treatment. With the advancements of robotic technologies, this remains one of the most promising and exciting fields in the medical world. Yang Chengxi, CGTN, Shanghai.
And that's it for The World Today. I'll be back in just a moment with more news from the continent in Africa Live. Thanks for watching.
Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Over the last 14 hours of rain.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
In Sierra Leone, intensive care doctors are struggling to save critically injured victims of the tanker explosion. Sudan mediators keeping hope alive as pro-democracy protesters dig in against military rule. And rescuers still digging through rubble in Nigeria a week after a building collapsed in Lagos, leaving 42 dead. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. Africa's biggest oil producer pledges to reach zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2060. But what will it take to overcome current challenges? And in sports, African athletes return to New York for the 50th edition of the marathon. We start the hour with the latest from Sierra Leone, where hospital authorities have posted the names of people being brought in for treatment after Friday's deadly tanker explosion. The number of casualties has risen to 108. Relatives have been waiting outside hospitals for updates on the victims. Officials say nearly 100 people are being treated for injuries. Most are in a critical condition. One intensive care unit says about 30 victims are not expected to survive. Many doctors and nurses were called in overnight to handle the influx of patients. The explosion took place after a fuel tanker collided with another truck as it was pulling into a gas station near the capital, Freetown. Well, for more on this, let's bring in Eric Kawa, a journalist based in Freetown, Sierra Leone. He joins us live now via Skype. Eric, the latest figures from the authorities are putting the death toll at 108 with over 92 people injured. What more can you tell us?
All right, thank you so much for having me. Giving you updates on the incident that happened so far. The figures keep fluctuating, they keep rising in, out, and they keep, just being over and over again. But as of the latest that I got yesterday, speaking to the Director General of the National Disaster Management Agency, the toll was at 99, and he said keep increasing, are in and are out, as you have said so far. So the situation yesterday was coming to normal a bit, because we went to the scene and we saw rubble, we saw a lot of things that were affected, and also met with family members and other eyewitnesses who shared their experiences with us. So the situation is devastating, and Sierra Leoneans are still trying to grapple with the situation and to recover from those wounds so far.
A devastating situation indeed, Eric. Tell us, how are hospitals coping with the high number of casualties, and what are some of the most urgent needs of the medical teams that are helping these victims?
So the situation, as we have stated, that it is quite devastating, and then there's been an appeal. This morning I was listening to local media, and then doctors are calling for urgent need. They're in need of many medications in order to be able to treat the people who actually got injured during the incident. So many hospitals across the country have admitted individuals who actually suffered from this incident. We have the main peripheral hospital, that is the colonial hospital. They have a quite number of people there. Also at the emergency hospital, Choitram Hospital, and other key health facilities like the 34 military hospital as well. So the cry now is getting a lot more of these medications, and that also happened as a result of the National Petroleum a company that donated some drugs yesterday to some individuals at the hospital. So the doctors are now appealing for more aid, and parents and relatives are also at different hospitals to be sure that they identify their loved ones. But it has been quite challenging, because the extent to which some people got damaged, they were beyond recognition, and it was quite difficult. And those who survived, most of them, when we went to the scene yesterday, we got reports that they also lost their lives, which is quite devastating.
Indeed it is, and it must be all hands on deck in the hospitals in and around Freetown. Thank you so much, Eric Kawa, joining us there from Sierra Leone. Now, in Sudan, pro-democracy protesters are calling for 2 days of civil disobedience against military rule. The calls are steered by the Sudanese Professionals Association. The association is a coalition of trade unions and was instrumental in the protests that led to the ouster of Omar al-Bashir in 2019. The latest call for protests come 2 weeks after a military takeover of the transitional government and the arrest of Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok and other civilian leaders. A statement published on social media by the SPA vows no negotiation, no partnership and no legitimacy. The SPA appealed for supporters to avoid confrontation with security forces during the protest planned for Sunday and Monday. Multiple mediation efforts to reconcile civilian and military leaders have been taking place, with a delegation from the Arab League arriving this weekend. Now, the Consumer Protection Association of Sudan has initiated a lawsuit against telecommunication companies operating in the country. This follows the disruption of internet services in the capital Khartoum, occasioned by the military takeover on October 25th. Media owners say they've suffered heavy losses due to the cutting of internet services. The Consumer Protection Association, on its part, says the provision of internet services is a right guaranteed by the Sudanese constitution. Economists have also weighed in on the matter, saying the interruption has negatively affected the country's overall economy.
The interruption has very large financial impact, considering that most sites depend on revenues through the service provided by Google account or Google revenue, and this interruption will certainly affect the revenue. There are various expenses such as office rent and the salaries of editors and employees inside the center, and therefore their income will be affected due to this interruption.
We have great confidence in the Sudanese judiciary, and we are very confident in the laws, and we are very confident in the constitutional document, which stipulates that the use of the internet is a right and was signed by the partners.
This matter has an economic cost as well as a social cost, because there are families who depended on the internet for their livelihood. And now these families are suffering from the hardships of living because the only source of income is now completely stopped.
The Economic Community of West African States is scheduled to convene an extraordinary summit in Accra today to discuss the political situations in both Guinea and Mali. ECOWAS has suspended membership of both nations following military takeovers. The regional bloc is also calling for the release of former Ghanaian President Alpha Condé, who was arrested in September. They're also urging the military leadership in Guinea under Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya to hold elections and return the country to constitutional order. The meeting today will also discuss a political transition to civilian rule in Mali. Well, CGTN correspondent Nabil Ahmed Rufai is following the story for us. He joins us live now from Accra. Nabil, another ECOWAS meeting on the transition processes in both Guinea and Mali. What should we expect?
Indeed, Lindy, another meeting here. The last time we had a meeting here on the situation in Guinea and Mali was in September, and that's when the ECOWAS leaders gave some directives for the both countries to follow in returning their countries to civilian rule. With regard to Guinea, the ECOWAS had given the country 6 months to prepare for, to return the country to a civilian government. And with Mali, the leaders had said they want their country to have their elections early February next year. So this particular meeting is to update the leaders on the process so far from the time we had the meeting in September till now, what has happened in both countries. We know that the ECOWAS Commission president a week ago visited Guinea to also apprise himself on the situation there, and he met with the junta, who is now the president of the transition. We know that he has also appointed a prime minister for the transition, also appointed some ministers to see to the transition to civilian rule. But as to whether the country will still go ahead to hold elections within the next 6 months, that is something that is not clear, and the junta leader has not actually said when elections will be held. Now, with regard to Mali, We know that the latest development has been the fact that an ECOWAS envoy was sacked from the country some couple of weeks ago. Now, this meeting will look at that situation and the way forward. We know that they are supposed to hold elections early February next year. As to whether that is still going to happen, we are not certain yet. And the leaders will be updated on the situation in Mali as well today.
Well, Nawal, of course, we've seen, as you've mentioned, ECOWAS engage in meetings and other forms of intervention in these two countries, even suspending them, or rather suspending their membership. But tell us, how are these efforts of ECOWAS impacting the pace of transition in these two countries?
Well, Lindy, some analysts have said the pace of the intervention of ECOWAS and the mediation in returning both Guinea and Mali to civilian rule has been quite slow. But then the ECOWAS leaders have also said they are just doing everything possible to make sure that these countries return to civilian rule. We know with regard to Guinea, they've been going to the country to meet with the leaders and to see how best they'll be able to achieve their aim of returning the country to a civilian government. We know that for now, the ECOWAS leaders have pledged their support to Guinea to help them in the whole transition process, and that's something that they say is a good step. With regard to Mali, they will be taking a decision on the country as well today because of the latest developments of one of their envoys being sacked from the country. And they will also, as to whether sanctions will be applied to the country, it's unclear at the moment. But then they will be making another commitment to help the country in their election process, if indeed they will be able to hold the elections in February next year. But we know that the junta leader in Mali has said they will be holding a nation-building forum next month, that's December. As to whether this would spearhead the holding of elections in February, that is also not clear. And these are the issues that will be discussed here today, Lindy.
Nawal Ahmed Rufai, thank you so much for that update, joining us there live from Accra, Ghana. Now, almost a week after a 21-story building collapsed in the Nigerian commercial city of Lagos, rescuers are still digging through rubble in search of survivors. Over 40 people have now been confirmed dead from the accident, including the owner of the property. Some are still searching for their missing relatives. CGTN's Deji Bademosi has this update on the story.
Dorcas Ohen has been hanging around the collapsed building site for days now, hoping to set eyes on her son, who had been working in the building when it came down. She traveled over 700 kilometers from her remote village in Nigeria's north-central Benue state to get here. The boy in the middle of this picture is her son David, and since the building collapsed, nothing has been heard from him.
She says she wants to see the body of her son and she wants to take it home.
David's relative Fidelis, who has accompanied the mother on the trip, says it's been heartbreaking for the family.
My own problem is for me, let me just see his corpse to be confirmed that, yeah, this is where he is. Then whenever they release him to me, I can come over and pick him. But now that I'm from different states down here, I don't even know what to go back and tell my elderly people in the village, because I was the one that brought him out from the village to the city. So, that is sad.
Like Dorcas, a number of relatives are still looking for their loved ones. Rescue operations are still going on, but the hope of finding anyone alive beneath the rubble is now fading.
Some bodies are ready for identification, so people can go to ID Asiaba to identify the bodies of their loved ones. For bodies that may be very difficult to identify, we are going to be conducting a DNA test for them, for such bodies to be identified. And I would like to let you know that the operation continues.
As for Ohen, she's still holding on to hope that her son David will be found alive. Deji Bademasi, CGTN, Lagos.
You are watching Africa Live. We'll be back after this short break. A commission that was set up to look into Belgium's colonial past in the Democratic Republic of Congo has released a report which calls on the European nation to pay reparations to its former colony for committing human rights violations. The commission was created by the Belgian Parliament last year after Black Lives Matter protests in the United States. Some Congolese citizens have hailed the call for reparations for injustices committed during the colonial period. CGTN's Chris Ochamringa has more from Kinshasa.
10 experts, including historians, political scientists and lawyers, were tasked with examining human rights abuses during Belgium's colonial rule, most notably in the Congo, and evaluating how that history still impacts people today. This included cases of forced labor, racism, and the kidnapping and deportation of thousands of mixed-race children. In a recently released report, the expert panel calls on Belgium to pay reparations to the DRC, a recommendation that has been welcomed by many Congolese. But a university professor in Kinshasa is not as upbeat, saying that the involvement of foreign entities has weakened the cause.
The DRC as a country has not taken up the struggle, has not taken up that claim. It has been made by private institutions, individuals have been making the same claim, or some association for human rights. These are the kind of institutions that have been making that claim. And for it to have the power similar to what Benin had, the DRC as a government, as a country, has to take up the struggle, has to take up the claim. And that's what the government of the DRC has failed to do.
Belgium controlled the DRC from the early 19th century until it won independence in 1960. Millions of Congolese were killed during the reign of King Leopold II. In June last year, Belgium's reigning monarch, King Felipe, expressed his deepest regrets to the DRC for his country's colonial abuses. While the king's apology was welcomed by the DRC government, many Congolese demanded compensation for the atrocities committed against their ancestors. The Black Lives Movement in the US last year stirred the Belgian government to look into its colonial past after statues of its former leaders were defaced by protesters. Earlier this year, Belgium promised to return artworks that were stolen from the DRC during the colonial period. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Uganda's parliament has banned all unvaccinated people, including legislators, from accessing its premises. The same mandate has been introduced at universities and tertiary institutions across the country. The decision is, however, stirring debate in the country, as Leon Senyange reports.
Open for the first time since June, this university in the capital Kampala is busy yet again. While the institution is advising on the recommended COVID-19 prevention measures, it is also weighing mandated vaccination as a pass to get in.
It's a good measure because we feel we need to rely on the vaccines to reopen everything. And no one, I think, no parent, no student wants the university closed because it has been closed many times and they have suffered. So to avoid that, let's take what we think will help us out.
The institution has over 33,000 students. University officials say with the numbers, all studying could be a potential spark to the spread of COVID-19 infections. The university now requires students to show identification to access the premises, but the requirement to demonstrate vaccination status is already becoming a divisive issue on campus.
It should be given time. It shouldn't be exactly now, but at least there should be a timeline when one cannot access a given premises when he's not vaccinated.
It is actually a fair decision for all of us, and I would encourage everyone to vaccinate and, we come and proceed.
I believe they're just giving us some time, excusing us a bit, but I believe we need to come next week. I assume it will be mandatory.
Various government institutions, including the country's parliament, have implemented a no-access policy unless vaccinated. It is already a polarizing issue.
You can't force people to take a vaccine that they do not, that they don't feel comfortable with. The onus goes back to government to ensure that it does more and robust sensitization.
Uganda launched its nationwide vaccination program last March. The campaign has, however, been hampered by unavailability of vaccines and vaccine hesitancy. So far, at least 3.2 million Ugandans, approximately 7% of the country's population, have been vaccinated. Over 400,000 have received a second jab. Leon Senyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Algerians are increasingly seeking out herbal treatment as an alternative to mainstream medicine. This has left medical practitioners concerned as the informal industry remains largely unregulated. CGTN's Wanja Mungai brings us more details.
A rising demand for natural herbs in Algeria has raised concerns among medical practitioners. The largely unregulated industry acts as an alternative to mainstream treatment and medicine. Traders involved in the growing field defend their profession, citing that Algerians are now gaining confidence in the herbs.
People's demand for natural herbs for medicine is increasing, and people are accepting it in order to avoid the use of chemical drugs and a desire to use what is natural. And the therapeutic prescription that we offer are based on experience, and our ancestors used them and gave healing results.
Authorities in Algeria report that there are a little over 2,000 dealers specializing in herbal medicine. Health professionals are agitated over the increasing trade.
The traditional stores selling medicinal herbs are competing with us in the medicinal market, perhaps due to the high cost of living or the accustomedness of some patients to herbal medicine. But we must be aware of some dangers in using herbs without scientific medical advice.
Herbalists say the preparations they sell have been passed down through the generations, and questions of affordability and access to mainstream medicine leave Algerians looking to natural remedies in the belief that their health is in safe hands. Wanjamungai, CGTN.
Coming up in your business news up next. Africa's biggest oil producer pledges to reach zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2060, but cannot overcome current challenges.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has pledged the country will reach net zero emissions by 2060. He made the commitment at the ongoing UN Climate Summit, COP26, in Glasgow, Scotland. Nigeria is Africa's biggest oil producer and depends on revenue from oil to drive its economy. The country has huge oil reserves and is hoping to attract new investments to its oil and gas industry with a new petroleum industry law. But as Deji Bademosi reports, the government faces a daunting challenge to attain its net zero emissions target.
Nigeria is among countries with low carbon footprints, but it's also one of the nations that have been hard hit by the effects of global warming. Desertification in the country's north is getting worse and forcing people to move. In the south, coastal communities are fast disappearing due to erosion caused by rising sea levels. Despite its low carbon footprints, Nigeria had pledged to reduce its greenhouse gas emission by 20% by 2030. The president has now gone a step further to announce a target of a net zero emission by 2060, and environmentalists here have welcomed the move, but say more still needs to be done.
My challenge with it is that, why 2060? Why put a timeline of 2060 when we are in an emergency? We are presently at 1.2 degrees Celsius global warming, and we can get to 1.5 before 2030. we can get to 1.7 before 2030. We can even get to 2 before 2030. So if 2030 is a critical time for us, any time between this decade is a critical time for us, why wait that long to reach net zero?
Nigeria relies heavily on oil to drive its economy, and so a transition towards cleaner energy will come at a great cost. Already, the government has begun the process to transition the country to a gas economy by 2030. But with the country importing most of its domestic gas, the cost has become a hurdle.
The cost of gas today, a kg at the pump station, not at the local vendors, at a gas station is about 600 naira per kg, and 12.5 kg will give you about 7,400. Comparing this to how much they sell firewood in the rural areas, even in the urban areas, most people will go for firewood than this gas. And if people go for firewood than buying expensive gas, then government hasn't solved any problem.
The Nigerian government is currently running an ambitious flagship project to connect 5 million households and 25 million people with solar power as part of its energy transition plan. Some people are installing solar panels in their homes, but the high cost involved means this is largely out of the reach of many.
So the green energies, are they really cheap? So when you say businesses should turn to green energies, where the solar panels and the additional installations do not come cheap, how does that really work? So eventually we would need to get to a point where taxes are taken off, custom duties are taken off, and then this I don't like to talk about subsidies, no, but this technology should come in cheap.
Costs involved in turning to green energy remain a challenge. Developed countries had pledged to provide $100 billion to developing countries by 2020 to attain climate change objectives, but they are yet to do so. If they could match their words with action, then countries like Nigeria might realize their net zero carbon emission targets. DG Bademasi, CGTN, Lagos.
Banks provide direct funding to the economy, and that's why economists and environmentalists are betting their hopes on banks to guide capital towards the green spectrum of the economy and away from high-polluting, high-energy consuming industries. A new risk reporting standard called the TCFD has been launched. CGTN's Jia Cheng caught up with Wenjian Fang via Zoom. Fang is the general manager of the Bank of China's London branch. Jia Cheng raised questions regarding the business impact of the TCFD on banks and filed this report.
The Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures is the full name of TCFD. It was created in 2015 by the Financial Stability Board. It is a standard used by companies, banks, and investors when disclosing climate-related financial risks. That comes in handy for banks in lending decisions that have environmental impact.
Bank of China officially became a member of the TCFD in February this year. We believe the TCFD framework is quite suited to the banks. And as it has been formulated by central banks from the G20 countries, jointly with top-tier financial institutions, so we see supporting TCFD as a beneficial and pioneering attempt to explore the best practice in climate risk control and information disclosure, together with our peer groups across the world.
Global banks are gradually increasing their green finance services while applying greener standards in credit assessments, lending, and portfolio management. As a major Chinese bank, what are Bank of China's business targets for green finance?
And we have now set up some quantitative targets for the first time. And for example, Bank of China will provide no less than 1 trillion RMB in financing to green industries during the period of its 14th five-year plan. And the proportion of green finance should increase year on year. For the domestic corporate green lending, for example, the overall 5-year growth rate should be no less than 5%, and if possible, even as much as 10%.
However, the world is not yet ready to go fully green. Most major economies are still trying to strike a balance between fossil fuels and green energy. But banks, as sources of fundings to the real economy, do have a strong say and potential leadership in a green reform.
On the one hand, we want to support the new energy by taking on more green projects. On the other hand, we cannot just stripping away brown assets like taking off clothes. A simple approach of reducing brown assets could also expose financial institutions, and to to undue risks, for example, credit risks, reputation, and litigation risk, etc. And TCFD is designed to provide a framework to guide financial institutions towards better assessment and pricing of the impact of their carbon exposure and climate risk, including arising from entities beyond our immediate balance sheets. TCFD data could also help financial institutions get a more comprehensive understanding and assessment of climate risk exposure and control, while helping them to make a more sensible, balanced, and appropriate allocation between the brown and green assets.
Fang noted that the green progress will initially limit the funding channels for borrowers in high energy consumption industries and pressure their business performances as a result. But in general, as Fang said, companies, banks, and governments are on the same page to go green. The task now is to carefully and prudently manage the green transition so that lenders, borrowers, and the economy as a whole will firmly adapt to the new economic model for the future. Xia Cheng, CGTN, Beijing.
It's estimated that Africa only accounts for some 2% of the global carbon market. But analysts say there's major potential for growth. Enoch Sequoia takes a look at how carbon trade initiatives in Kenya are mitigating the effects of climate change.
This is how carbon offsets work. When one company or group removes a unit of carbon from the atmosphere as part of their normal business activity, they can generate a carbon offset. Now, other companies can purchase this carbon offset to reduce their own carbon footprint. In a nutshell, a company with these carbon credits, whether generated or purchased, is allowed to emit certain amounts of greenhouse gases. Nancy Githaiga, the Kenya country director of the African Wildlife Foundation, says this then creates incentives for heavy factories to pollute less and communities to restore forests.
And we are not just looking at forests and forest restoration, we are also looking at landscapes. If we are able to leave our wild lands, our wildlife habitats as they are, without conversion, without fragmentation, then they should also be able to attract, the carbon credits. So it's not just about forestry, so there is a huge potential for Africa.
Nearly 20% of the world's tropical forests are found in Africa. The continent, therefore, has the ability to deliver over 1 billion tons of carbon dioxide emission reductions annually.
If you look at the Bond Challenge, already committed to restore about, we talk about 100 million hectares in Africa. Kenya has 5.2 million hectares of this. So that commitment is there. So are we able to get credits from that commitment that we have already made for restoration?
But as reforestation efforts are stepped up in parts of Africa, Kenya's main power generation company is playing its part. So far, the Kenya Power Generation Company, KenGen, has contributed to offsetting on annual basis 1.5 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. For companies like KenGen, the market is booming. It recently sold an equivalent of 4.6 million tons of carbon emissions, and over the last 18 months, it plans to auction more. The company has so far registered 6 Clean Development Mechanism projects. The Clean Development Mechanism project, like this one just a few kilometers from the Kenyan capital, have contributed to national development by providing clean energy that ensures improved environmental quality, positive health impacts, and increased productivity. But more importantly, they play a crucial part in climate change mitigation.
Being a clean source of power generation, geothermal energy can play a major role in decarbonizing the power sector and increasing the world's energy security.
The Kenyan company intends to incorporate additional geothermal, wind and solar projects and further reduce carbon emissions annually. Enoch Sequoia, CGTN, Ngong, Kenya.
Various African leaders have hailed a speech delivered by Chinese President Xi Jinping at the opening ceremony of the 4th China International Import Expo. The leader of Zambia's Party for National Unity and Progress has described Xi's speech on international trade as refreshing. Let's listen in.
China is advancing
the principles of multilateralism, where you open the country basically to all the countries of the world. So China is engaging itself in fair trade. That's a testimony to fair trade. Multilateralism itself speaks to openness to trade. And so China is becoming a new frontier for free trade and more so access to Chinese market. Digital platform becomes key to expedite trade. Even under COVID conditions, trade can still be flowing because the digital platform makes it easy for e-commerce. So those platforms are very important to enhance e-commerce. E-commerce makes it cheaper, faster, and efficient, to expedite foreign trade. And China is leading the way in this technology. Not only leading the way, China has affordable technology globally. And therefore, for developing countries like ours, China becomes a natural partner because of accessible digital technology and its openness, and that China is an uptaker of most of our goods and services. So I must say that China provides the new horizon for Africa's growth.
Africa Live. Find your voice. Sports news now. A number of elite athletes from Africa will compete at the 50th running of the New York Marathon on Sunday. The elite entry in the women's race has attracted a stellar field led by Kenya's Olympic marathon champion Perez Chepchirchir, US Olympic bronze medalist Molly Seidel, Namibia's 2019 World Championship bronze medalist Halila Johannes, as well as Tokyo Marathon champion Ruti Aga of Ethiopia. There'll also be a number of debutantes in the race, including Kenya's Viola Cheptoo, who has now transitioned to the road races from the track.
Be a really packed field. I know a lot of big athletes are going to be there. A lot of Ethiopians. Paris is going to be there. There will be Sally Kipyego, that just came from the Olympics. There's Molly from the US. So it's a big field, and it's going to be, all the top 10 women there on the list are going to be really, really good. So I'm just going to do my best.
Well, sports fans have been allowed to return to stadiums in Kenya after the country recently lifted the ban on spectator attendance. Hundreds of rugby fans got the opportunity to cheer on their national team during the annual rugby festival, which also made a comeback this year. CGTN's Mohammed Abubakar reports.
After a long wait, the much-anticipated Safari Rugby Sevens returned to Nairobi's Nyayo National Stadium for the 2021 edition, boosted by the return of fans to the venue. Kenya's Sevens national team Shujaa emerged champions following a hard-fought 12-5 win against Germany in the final. The two-day tournament couldn't have come at a better time for the Shujaas, who need more game time as they look to pick up from the impressive third-place finish in the 2021 World Rugby Sevens series.
It's been a long training year with very few games. So what is important at the end of the day is game. So for us, we were quite happy to have this tournament. And of course, we have to thank those people who made it possible, being the government and KRU, and also the fans who came.
The event was also a chance for the fans to show their support in person after the long wait away from the sport due to the coronavirus pandemic. It comes after Kenya lifted the ban on fans in stadiums, which was widely welcomed.
It feels awesome. The experience is good. We feel alive once again. It's been a long time on the television, streaming all these games. But now we feel very nice to be in the field, to see our players, to see all the fans, catching up once again after all this time. It's quite awesome.
Kenya Morans, the national team's development squad, finished third in the competition. A result which excites head coach Innocent Simiyu, who hopes to have a strong squad for a busy season ahead.
Yeah, we're working on the depth. That is where we are at, actually, because we have a long season ahead. And you could see with just 2 tournaments, we got 5 key players out. So we are really interested in building more depth in the team. and we are quite happy with what we have seen. Selection now will be difficult, but we will manage to get the players who represent the team.
Shujaa's season begins at the Dubai Sevens on the 26th of November. Mohamed Abubakar, CGTN.
Ethiopia's annual race, the Great Ethiopian Run, has been postponed. The 10-kilometer event has been called off owing to the declaration of a state of emergency by the government designed to avoid threats from the Tigray People's Liberation Front. Colette Wanjoyi reports from Addis Ababa.
12,500 people took part in the Ethiopia Great Run held early this year after the organizers failed to host one in 2020 because of COVID-19 pandemic. In 2019, the event attracted over 45,000 participants. Registration for this year's race, slated for 14th of November, had already begun. But the state of emergency has forced them to postpone the event. The government is keen to prioritize security in Addis Ababa after the Tigray People's Liberation Front and the Oromo Liberation Army threatened to enter the capital city and oust the government of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. Both have been designated as terrorist groups by the parliament. Two-time 1,500 meters Olympic champion from Kenya, Faith Chepngetich, was expected to grace the 10-kilometer event. The organizers of the initiative, run by legendary athlete Haile Gabriel Selassie, says they are monitoring the situation and will advise in the next few weeks on a possible new date. Colette Wanjoyi, CGTN, Addis Ababa.
In motorsports, Valtteri Bottas took a surprise pole position ahead of 7-time Formula One world champion Lewis Hamilton as Mercedes locked out the front row for the Mexico City Grand Prix on Saturday. Bottas set his pole time of 1 minute 15.875 seconds with his first flying lap of the final session, and it was comfortably good enough with Hamilton 0.145 seconds behind. The outcome marked an extraordinary turnaround for Mercedes at a high-altitude circuit expected to favour title rivals Red Bull. Red Bull's championship leader, Max Verstappen, 12 points ahead of Hamilton with 5 races remaining, will line up third with teammate Sergio Perez fourth for his home race. To Germany now, Borussia Dortmund's 4-game winning streak in the Bundesliga came to a halt as they were beaten 2-1 away to RB Leipzig on Saturday. Christopher Nkunku put Leipzig in front in the 29th minute. Dortmund missed numerous chances to extend their lead before they were punished by a Marco Reus equalizer early in the second half. But Yusuf Poulsen restored Leipzig's advantage in the 68th, a decisive goal that clinched a first win for his side against Dortmund in over 4 years. The result left second-placed Dortmund on 24 points after 11 games, 4 behind Bundesliga leaders Bayern Munich. And that's it for this edition of Africa Live. Now remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on the screen.